As if writing an essay isn't already hard enough, students seem to be conditioned from middle school and high school all the way through college that in order to write a good essay, you need to start off with a good hook. And I've worked with a fair number of students, and I've never read a paper that was held back by not having a good hook. And I've also never read a paper that was made better by having a good hook. It really doesn't matter. Having a strong hook is not going to increase the quality of an essay. And ultimately, it's not really going to keep anyone around to read your paper any longer than they would have anyway, because who's actually reading the paper? And what context is that paper being written in? Those are the two most important questions when you're figuring out whether or not you need a hook. And in most cases, especially in the essays that you're writing for college, you really don't need the hook. And if I'm being completely honest, typically by the time I get to the end of the first paragraph, I've already forgotten what the hook even was. If I'm forgetting about the hook and I'm not judging it or using it as a criteria for grading, by the time I get to the end of your introduction, then what's the point of scrutinizing that one element of the paper and letting that hold you back from writing the rest of what's important, which is the actual body paragraphs? So like I said, the purpose of a hook is to get the reader attached to your message or whatever it is that you are going to be explaining to them over the course of your essay. It's to hook them so you can reel them in and get them throughout the rest of your paper. The thing is, you don't need to hook your professor if that's the audience you're writing the paper to. They have to read your paper regardless, so the hook is pointless for them. So if the hook isn't for them, then who exactly is the hook for? Well, the most reasonable argument is that students are taught to use a hook and develop hooks for their writing because there are situations in real life where you might actually need a good hook. Some of those situations might be when you are writing a proposal to get money for a grant, when you're filling out a cover letter for an application to a job. Those are both real life situations where a hook is going to be important, where whoever's reading your application might skip over a lot of your cover letter if you don't have a good hook, if you don't engage them immediately within that first paragraph. But where the hook is most universally important is actually in a bookstore where people pick up books, you read the first page, and if you don't like the first page, you put the book back down, you don't purchase it. So for authors, writing a good hook is one of the most valuable skills that they can have. And not just a good hook, but a good first page, because if they can't connect with the reader on that first page, then they're missing out on a sale, they're missing out on revenue, and all that time they spent making the book amounts to nothing, or a little bit less than it would have otherwise. But these situations aren't very widespread, and most of us aren't going to be ending up writing proposals for grants, and a lot of us in our professional lives aren't going to need to convince anyone of anything. Least of all to read through the entire passage that we've prepared for them. If over the course of your job you are asked to write a document and submit it for that job, then chances are whoever you have to submit that to is going to have to read it as part of their own job. So even with something like that, there's really no point in having the hook. It's going to be read regardless. If I were to ask my students to produce an argumentative essay about a topic of their choosing, the only context that matters for them in that situation is A, it's due for a grade, B, I, as the professor, am the only person who's going to read it, and C, I have to read it in order to grade it. Who is that student hooking? I don't need motivation or incentive to read the assignment because I have to read it. In the context the student produces the work in, the hook is functionally useless. If we're going to teach students the significance of having a hook in their writing, then we need to situate the writing that we assign within a context where that hook is actually valuable. Otherwise, we're just setting up a lot of students to scrutinize over the details of this one element that they have been erroneously taught has a universal value in the quality of their writing, when it doesn't. I've seen so many students spend weeks or months just scrutinizing over getting the perfect introduction or the perfect hook that they completely neglect their body paragraphs. And in most cases, that's what I'm going to be grading most heavily, is the body paragraphs. That's where the bulk of the information you provide in an essay is. So then why aren't we teaching students how to write better body paragraphs instead of teaching them that they need a great introduction and a great conclusion? Those elements of a paper are important, but are they really so important that it's worth putting students in a position where they are putting so much value on their introduction and their conclusion that they are foregoing putting the time and effort that is necessary into those body paragraphs and fleshing out their ideas. And here's the thing, a terrible conclusion and a terrible introduction is significantly less likely to invalidate the competency of body text, whereas mediocre body text is very likely to create dissonance when it's sat between an introduction and a conclusion that speak to grander ideas than the body can live up to. There are only so many ways to start an essay. Some of them are cliche, and that's fine, but those cliches tend to stem from advice about writing good hooks. But then, if you aren't writing hooks anymore, then what should the first sentence actually be? Well, if your goal is to actually make progress and finish your essay, then maybe the first sentence should just be whatever it needs to be. Anything at all.